I was a Commodore's messenger working directly for L. Ron Hubbard from the age of 12. There were consequences for me leaving. People who got in trouble were sent to the chain locker as a punishment. I'm Janice Grady. I was born in Scientology, and my parents had already been in Scientology for a couple of years before I was born. I grew up in Victoria, Australia until 1965 when Scientology was banned in Victoria and the family moved to England where the Scientology headquarters were. We left Australia when I just turned 10 and arrived in England where we lived for 1.5 years until my brother, sister, and I in January 1968 followed our mother into the Sea Organization, which was headed by L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, who now called himself the Commodore. Upon arriving on the ship in January at 11 years old, we found that our mother was off on another ship and not there to meet her 3 children upon our arrival. I remained living on this ship for the next 8 years. The whole time I was on the ship, I was a Commodore's messenger working directly for L. Ron Hubbard from the age of 12. And I remained working with him directly for the next 11 years. As a Commodore's messenger, it first started off just running messages for L. Ron Hubbard because he was now on a larger ship than he was used to. So it was easier if he had a young person like myself running around to find people or go ask them different questions or deliver a dispatch. Myself, I did basically 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, except on weekends, every second weekend where I got 24 hours off or if I was sent on a mission, but I did that for the next 8 years of while living on the ship. You know, growing up on a ship without a parent, it was lonely. I did have my brother and sister, but that's different than having a parent. My father did arrive on the ship in March of 1968, and he remained until about June of 68 when he left. He got pretty badly abused while he was on board the ship, including being chain locked for nearly a week and only being fed bread and water. So he decided it wasn't for him, but he thought us kids were doing okay. Chain locker is where the chain attached to the anchor is stored. And when the anchor is dropped, the chain comes out of the locker. And when the chain's pulled up from the ocean floor, it's stored in that locker. Well, what was happening is people who got in trouble were sent to the chain locker as a punishment. I worked hard to make sure I did not go into that chain locker. Though our mother was there on and off, she ended up in early 69 being sent away on garrison. And so she didn't come back. And I remained on the ship pretty much for 5 years without going anywhere or seeing my parents. L. Ron Hubbard used to call me a little waif, which is like an orphan, because I didn't have any parents there. I used to see if I could go from birthday to birthday without crying. And if I feel I'm getting griefy, I'd kind of try and pull myself together. Nope, can't cry until my next birthday. And I don't think that's healthy. A kid should be able to show their emotions and have someone that they can tell their emotions to. Hubbard had very different personalities. He could be great, he could be laughing, telling stories, very inspirational. And then there's times he was explosive. He had a very explosive temper. Where you, as a messenger, being with him when he'd be explosive, I would work to try and calm him down and, you know, let him know, don't worry, I've got the situation being handled, and I'd run off and do whatever I needed to do and talk to people and to get it being handled, and then come back and say, okay, they're dealing with it, don't worry. And as a child, I used to nearly every single day when it was my time to go on watch. That's what we called our 6 hours with him, was watch. I would, before I went up that final set of stairs, I would tell myself, I can do this. I'll have a good watch. He'll give me a well done. I'm not going to get him mad. And that's what I would tell myself. And then, okay, I'm ready. And then I'd go up the stairs and report for duty. I was on the ship from January 1968 until September 1975. So it was 7-8 years I was on the ship. Hubbard died in 1986. 1986. He died in January. And I remained until August of 1990, where slowly things started changing. Your freedom was being slowly taken away. You didn't have the, things, the schedule got tighter and tighter, and the control of where you can go and when you can drive your car and that type of thing. It all kind of got taken away, and you can feel the freedom going. And that's where I'm like, wait a minute, this is not what I agreed to. And I didn't even really agree to it in the first place. I mean, in the first place, I was 11 years old and I had to sign a Sea Org contract for 1 billion years because where would I go? My mother wasn't there. My brother and sister were on the ship. I had nowhere to go. So in order to be on the ship when my mother returned, I had to sign that contract. So, and over the years, I didn't have an issue with it, but then slowly I just watched my freedom going, and I'm like, this is not anything like it was, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Then I found myself pregnant, and I had seen what had happened in the orders that had come from Miscavige on enforcing abortion on women, and I was not going to have that. And so basically, my husband and I left in the middle of the night. I joked that I was 34, barefoot and pregnant when I left. After Hubbard passed away, Miscavige ordered the executive director of Scientology to issue an order that there was to be no more children in the Sea Organization, which was the management and the senior body of Scientology. They didn't care if Scientology public had kids. They just didn't want the responsibility in the Sea Organization having to deal with having to staff the nurseries and feed the kids and deal with parents not being on their job because they're off at the nursery seeing their kids. There were a lot of changes for the worse with Miscavige, but there was also bad stuff when L. Ron Hubbard was there. And I can't justify for him as to why he did that, because there were things that went on and the brutality of how people were treated is not per the scriptures of Scientology. Scientology was about communicating and granting beingness and taking responsibility, becoming more knowledgeable on things, where if you followed the ethics penalties and so forth, there's the disconnection, which is the most brutal thing that they can do. And it makes the situation worse by enforcing people to disconnect. If you were considered a suppressive person, someone who is not forwarding, or you're against the goals and aims of Scientology or L. Ron Hubbard, you were considered a suppressive person. And that meant that you could be fair gamed, meaning people can mistreat you, they can steal from you, they cannot pay loans back, they want to support you, and they had to disconnect from you. If a family member was antagonistic to Scientology, that Scientologist was to disconnect from that antagonistic Scientologist. So when my brother left in 1982, I disconnected from him. I didn't write it out, but I didn't see him for 8 years until I left and I showed up on his doorstep because I had nowhere else to go. At first, when I left, I was very shy and backed off and uncertain of myself. I couldn't even sit down and have a conversation with someone as things in the regular world. I didn't know what all the TV programs were. I didn't know what was happening in the news. I couldn't talk about how a tomato grew on a plant, or, I couldn't talk about anything like that, because my world experience stopped at 11 years old. Well, actually at 9, because when we went to England, I was surrounded by Scientologists all the time. And I grew up on a ship. So I didn't know. I didn't go to high school. I didn't have prom. I didn't have any of that kind of stuff. So it was, when I came out, it was all very new to me. There were consequences for me leaving. Luckily, my brother had left 8 years before, so I could now see him. But my sister had already left 8 months before I did. So I was able to now see her, so that was great. However, my father was still a Scientologist, so he had to disconnect from me and my sister. But when we left and came to Las Vegas, my father actually came to visit us because I'd now had my son and he wanted to see his grandson. So he came to Vegas and visited us, and there was a private investigator who Scientology had hired to become a part of our lives. And he reported that my dad was visiting us, and my dad ended up getting pulled in by Scientology Office of Special Affairs, who handled all legal and that type of thing. And for 2 years, he was put through a program which is called sec checking. I do not practice Scientology, but I'm not one who's going to stop other people from practicing. If that's what they believe in, let them believe in it. My parents felt it helped them, so I'm not going to step on that and say it doesn't help people, because they felt it did. I just don't need it in my life, and I did not raise my children as Scientologists. There were little things I would do, and I still do, that are part of Scientology beliefs, but it's not my religion.